Has neuroqueer always felt like the right word for you, or did that language come later?
I think it came a little bit later. Once I received my diagnoses, I started to feel a whole lot more comfortable and confident in naming other parts of myself and in owning them, I think. And neuroqueer is something that I strongly resonate now with, and quite proudly. And I am glad that we've taken the word queer back. And it feels very much true to who and how I am. But it did take a little while, because it's just this process of deconstructing and unlearning and truly unmasking, and feeling like I was in a safe place to be able to do that, at the very least with my husband and child, and then more and more expansively.
Welcome back to the Neurodiversity Voices podcast. I'm Paul Cruz. Today's conversation is about creativity, not as performance, not as productivity, but as survival, as identity, and as a way of standing fully in your truth. My guest is Settino, poet, artist, activist, and late diagnosed autistic and ADHD adult. In this episode, we explore what happens when diagnosis doesn't change who you are, but changes how you see yourself. Erica shares what it meant to receive her diagnosis at 41, how that understanding unlocked self-compassion, and why poetry became the container that finally fit her nonlinear mind. We talk about grief for the younger self who didn't have language or support. We talked about claiming the word artist. We talked about vulnerability and what it feels like to publish work that makes you feel naked and raw. We also explore how nature, symbolism, tarot, and creative practice can become tools for self-understanding, especially when traditional frameworks don't always work for neurodivergent brains. At the heart of this conversation is one powerful idea. What if creativity is the place where we are allowed to land fully as ourselves, without punishment, without masking, without apology? If you're neurodivergent, creative, late diagnosed, or still figuring yourself out, I hope this conversation helps you feel seen. Let's begin.
Erica, when you imagine listeners finishing this episode, what do you most hope listeners feel or understand about neurodivergent life?
If they are themselves neurodivergent, I hope that they feel validated, and I hope that they feel seen, and I hope that they feel believed, and that they are able to utilize whatever might be of benefit for them to fully stand in their truth of who and how they are.
How do you usually describe your work when you're not in academic or literary space?
That's so tough because I find that it's like people want you to have a niche, and they want you to stay in your lane. And I don't necessarily feel like that's how I operate. So I do feel like it kind of crosses spaces. But I think that the best way that I describe my work and my intention is that I utilize personal practices for collective liberation. And that just means that through the things like writing and creating art and movement, yoga, and aspects of witchcraft and reading tarot and things like that, that all of that is to say that they're personal practices and they are in benefit, they are of benefit rather to us. And then to recognize, though, that we can extend that and even perhaps have a responsibility to extend that benefit to all. And I think that would be like the biggest connector, you know, for people to be able to say, like, this is definitely in benefit of myself, but also things that we do that are in benefit of ourselves can indeed be in benefit of all. And it is my hope that we would consider that.
What parts of your identity feel most present for you right now, and which ones feel quieter?
It's ever changing, isn't it? I think that in this moment in time, it feels a little fraught. It feels difficult to try to even imagine that my insight into whatever it is that I'm learning about myself would have benefit to others with everything that's going on in the world. And it's a scary time. And I think right now I'm probably identifying most with my relationship with my child who is neurodivergent, and having to navigate a world in which they're weaponizing, you know, neurodivergence and mental illness and all of the other things that are going on. And it can be a scary place. And I think that just out of necessity, my focus is strongly there. But also I feel like I have to balance that with a sense of creativity, or movement, or whatever else it is that I do, because it can also just be extremely scary. And I don't want to stay in that space. So finding some sense of balance between those things, I think, is how I'm most identifying right now.
When did you first start suspecting you might be autistic and ADHD, and what delayed clarity for you?
I suspected that I might be autistic when I suspected that my child was autistic, because I saw so much of myself in them. And once we received that diagnosis, and after having done all of the research and, having to be an advocate for my child for so many years before even getting those diagnoses, I was learning so much, and I was seeing how there were so many voices that hadn't been heard and lived experiences that hadn't been considered. And in simply relating with my child, I felt that we had so many similarities in the way in which we see the world and how we communicate and how we regulate and things like that. And I started to self-identify as autistic. And once my child received their diagnoses, I had already, I kind of already knew that we were on the same page. I really did not anticipate the ADHD component, because there is so much overlap and there can be so much confusion around it. So I'm still, figuring that out for myself and for my kid, really, in fact. But I did choose to, after my child received their diagnoses, I did choose to go and get my own. And I was fortunate enough to be able to do that and to have a doctor locally who specialized in working with women and girls, and specifically assessing women and girls for autism and ADHD and other neurodivergence. And so I was able to do that, and I received the diagnoses, and I'm, autistic, ADHD combined, and alexithymia. So there's a lot in the mix. And I'm still kind of figuring it out, but the best thing that's come from it is more understanding. And even if I don't understand necessarily what's happening in the moment, I'm able to offer myself a whole lot more grace and understanding, because now I know that this is just the way my brain works. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not flawed in any way. And I don't have to, I used to think that if I just worked harder or if I just worked smarter, and I know a lot of people can relate to that. I was 41 years old when I received my diagnosis. So that's a lifetime of trying to figure out why, some things came so easily to others and were so difficult for me, or whatever it might be. So it was really necessary for me to be able to offer myself more grace and understanding. So it doesn't make it easier to live with it. All of the challenges are still there, as are all of the strengths, but I understand it. And that understanding gets me to acceptance and compassion so much more quickly than I've ever been able to do.
Has neuroqueer always felt like the right word for you, or did that language come later?
I think it came a little bit later. Once I received my diagnosis, I started to feel a whole lot more comfortable and confident in naming other parts of myself and in owning them, I think. And neuroqueer is something that I strongly resonate now with, and quite proudly. And I am glad that we've taken the word queer back, and it feels very much true to who and how I am. But it did take a little while, because it's just this process of deconstructing and unlearning and truly unmasking, and feeling like I was in a safe place to be able to do that, at the very least with my husband and child, and then more and more expansively.
Was there any losses that came with diagnosis, not just relief?
I think that there is I don't know if I've lost anything. I do think that there is grief. There's a lot of grief for the period of not knowing and not understanding, and the hardships that can come from that, and thinking like perhaps I would have done some things differently, or perhaps I wouldn't have had to endure certain things that I did. Um, so I don't think it's the loss so much as there is a sense of I do feel like I carry around a certain level of perpetual grief for the little person I was, who was trying to navigate the world and, didn't have understanding or support that would have been really of benefit to me at that time. And I think I move with that in such a way that it allows me to be real clear and real focused on providing my child with what I didn't have. But I do think the grief remains.
What made poetry the right container for exploring late diagnosis?
Just language has always been such a natural form of expression for me. My mother is very verbose, and she's very well read, and she has an amazing vocabulary, and I came up with that. And it's always been something that I've enjoyed. I love learning about words. I love knowing the etymology of things, and playing with language just always felt like I was allowed to be much more expressive and also nonlinear. Poetry gives me the space to be nonlinear. It gives me the space to let my brain actually operate in the way that it naturally does. I don't necessarily have to fit any form or rhythm. There's rules, but there's rules that are meant to be broken, which I appreciate. So I found a lot of freedom in poetry and in prose, not just classic poetry, but also just prose, and getting my thoughts down in a way that felt expressive, and where it was kind of uninhibited. It was really, and continues to be, really cathartic.
Nature and animals appear central in the life forest. And what do they offer you that people sometimes can't?
kinship and unconditional grace, I think. Unconditional grace. I think there's so much that we can learn from animals and how they interrelate with each other and others, and there's so much that we can learn from the natural world that we've gotten away from and where we've become pretty disconnected from. And I think that there's always been a sense of comfort and even like this unseen support that, you know, it's there for all of us, but that I've been able to be more relaxed or more attuned to myself in that company. And also really learn a lot about connection and interconnection and how I show up in the world. It feels like, it might sound silly, but it feels like I show up in the world, or the way in which I would like to show up in the world is much more attuned to that rather than the kind of like the rat race and the traditional modern society mandates and expectations. So I've always felt like that's the place where I could breathe the most and where I see myself reflected back the most.
Did your relationship with creativity change after understanding yourself as ADHD?
I think that I embraced it even more. I've always been creative. I've always utilized aspects of expressive arts. I was a dancer. I've been, a practitioner of yoga movement for my entire life and teacher of it. And painting and writing and poetry. It's always been a part of what I've done and kind of dabbled in it, though I never had the audacity to call myself an artist prior to being diagnosed, prior to understanding myself better, which was pretty cool, actually, that that understanding of myself allowed me to own parts of myself that I wasn't prepared or able to put out to the world. So I think that I lean more heavily on it. It's absolutely a part of my daily life. And that it, like I said, with it is a way in which I find that I am able to express, even when I don't have words. I just am able to express whatever it is I feel like I need to kind of move through my body mind at that time. And it's been profound.
Was there a poem in the chapbook that felt risky or vulnerable to include?
Yeah. Yeah. The whole thing truly, but definitely more of the stuff about, some of the stuff you can say is more focused on animals and nature. It's all interwoven, but yes, certainly, I would say the poem Inheritance, the poem Abstraction, those are two right off the top of my head. Even The Devil and the Fool that are based on tarot cards. Those are though I feel very raw and exposed knowing that people are going to read those poems. And sometimes I do wonder why I've done it. Why did I put it out there? But I do also think that it's quite healing. And I do think that it was a step for me personally in my process of unmasking, where I don't necessarily want to have this kind of conversation with everybody I know. So they can read the poems and they can understand me, I think, on another level. And I can kind of conserve and preserve my energy and not have to kind of keep going over it and over it again. But it does I feel very naked, and raw is the word I use. And I just set up an event. I'm having an event for the chapbook now locally, and I'm really nervous. So it's it's at once extremely healing and gratifying, and at the same time I just like feel like, oh, I just don't want to be seen. Yeah.
Uh, how does your neurodivergence shape the way you approach activism and care?
I honestly don't know if I would be, well, obviously I wouldn't be who I am without it, right? But I don't know if I would be the kind of activist I am. And I'm so grateful for that. I just think that this idea of like hyper empathy or justice insensitivity is something that is so needed across the board. And thank goodness there are people out there who operate from that place, whether they're neurodivergent or not. But I know that the unique way in which I am wired absolutely lends to my feeling like I can't not be an activist. I can't not try to make change, even if it's in the, the smallest way possible, even if it's just in my own life. I can't not do it because I can't not see the suffering. I can't not see the pain that's being inflicted. And I think a lot of people can turn away. And I think a lot of people do for maybe self-preservation, a lot of different reasons. I can't. And so if I wasn't doing any kind of activism or pushing back against it, I feel like it would just be stuck in me. And it honestly sometimes feels like it would take me down. It's despairing, and I do feel that every single day. And I do know that as somebody who is so attuned to it, I do have to try to take care of myself more and find some sense of balance and not necessarily engage in everything. And that's hard. Finding the ways in which I want to show up and the ways in which I need to back off and take care of myself can be challenging. I think that's something I'm always going to have to try to navigate and work on. There's not any one thing that works really well. It's just every moment is a little bit different, capacity wise. But I do think that the way in which I see the world, the way in which I view patterns, and like I was saying before, this nonlinear way of thinking and seeing connections where perhaps others don't, it just makes sense to me that what's going on is abhorrent in so many ways, in so many different ways, in so many layers. Yeah, I think it's a huge part of my activism.
What connections do you see between animal liberation and neurodivergent liberation?
I think that all liberation is connected. I don't think anybody can be liberated if somebody else is not. And I don't think it has anything to do whatsoever with species. I think for as long as we are oppressing and exploiting and commodifying living beings, we are in this cycle of harm and hurt. And I don't think that it doesn't surprise me then if we could do that to them. It doesn't surprise me then that somebody can do it to another person. It's not surprising. It seems like, well, yeah, that would make sense that certain people are going to be able to do that. I don't. I believe in interconnection. I believe in interrelationship. I believe that nature shows us that in so many ways. And I believe strongly that my liberation is completely tied up with yours. And although I think I would probably still fight for your liberation, even if mine wasn't tied up with yours, but it is nonetheless. And I don't see any progress, not true sustainable progress being made until we recognize that this really has to be across the board, and that there's no reason for it not to be, because nobody deserves what goes on. Nobody deserves what these animals endure, and then by extension, what the farm workers endure, and by extension, what we're doing to the land and the climate and our own selves, our bodies, our health, our well-being. It's all connected, and nobody deserves the fallout of it. And the only reason we do it is because it's something that we've been conditioned to believe is normal. So it's another social construct, just like neurodivergence, and just like gender expression. It's just another way in which we're taught that this is the way things have to be. And then when you diverge from that, then, you're disordered or problematic, whatever the case may be. So it's just like there's no difference whatsoever. It's across the board because we're doing the same things. We're just doing them in different ways.
Has founding Karuna for Animals changed how you relate to burnout or sustainability?
Well, yeah, I founded Karuna for Animals in 2010. So I was not yet a mother and I was not yet diagnosed. And I burnt out hard with Karuna for Animals. So I did not have any of the understanding about myself that I do today. I was also working in animal care, regular animal rescue and animal care and advocacy. And I was really in the trenches of seeing profound suffering on a daily basis, and then feeling so on fire with having to get the information out there so that people would change it, so that we could make changes. And I absolutely burned out. And then I had my child, and I realized that nothing that I was doing was sustainable. I wasn't doing a great job with anything, and I was getting sick, and I needed to be there for my kid, and I needed to change my relationship to what activism looks like. So there are a lot of different activists. There are a lot of different ways in which we can show up for each other. I mean, truly, just the fact that we are a vegan family makes an immense difference. Some people are going to be out in the streets with picket signs, and we need that. We absolutely need that, but we also need other forms of activism. Raising children can be a profound form of activism. And then I found writing, making art. This is how I'm going to continue to really contribute to these causes and to getting my perspective and my experiences out there into the world. And you see that in the poems. I think in Dreaming, I say something along the lines of, I've seen it all, and that's not the worst of it. And I did. I saw horrors, animals being shot and stabbed, and just terrible, terrible, terrible things that are hidden away. And I do feel like I have a responsibility to bring it into the awareness of as many people as possible. But like I said earlier, trying to find the way to do that without, it becoming detrimental to me, it's challenging. So I do lean more toward the activism through words and activism through art, and rather than all the events I was planning and all the organizing I was doing, that was not sustainable for me.
What does tarot or magic offer you that traditional self-help or psychology didn't?
That's such a good question. It definitely offers a deeper, it offers a different way to access parts of my psyche and parts of my internal landscape that I am just not able to access on a regular basis or through traditional methods like CBT. We know, a lot of neurodivergent folks are not benefited by cognitive behavioral therapy. So tarot, because it's symbolism, right? And it's work through pictures, and we can make correlations and associations that we wouldn't ordinarily make if we weren't looking at those particular symbols or numbers or names of the archetypes, for instance. So it has allowed me to know myself much, much better than traditionally trying to sit down and just have a conversation with a therapist or try to figure out what it is I'm feeling and why. Alexithymia is still very misunderstood, and I mean, it's not even necessarily understood by me, because that's what it is in and of itself. For folks who don't know, alexithymia it's a challenge for me to understand and or name what I'm feeling in any given moment. It takes me longer to process that information. It takes me longer to understand perhaps where it's coming from. Oftentimes I will say to my husband, am I sick or am I anxious? And thank goodness for my husband, right? But that is a support I sometimes need, because it is really challenging for me to suss it out in the moment. And that is in everything. So when I'm working with tarot and I'm working with archetype and I'm working with symbolism and numbers, and it's not about what anybody else tells you it means. It's about, well, what is this? Like, what's the very first thing that comes up when you think of this? And that has just afforded me so much more freedom to be like, well, that's what's there. Instead of this feeling like I just don't know, the first thing that comes to my mind is what then I can begin to work with. And it's really been liberating for me.
Do you see spiritual frameworks as tools, languages, or companions?
Yes, I do. I also see them as problematic sometimes. So it's extremely, it's not, not all teachers are created equal. Not all methodologies are for everybody. And the problem I think that occurs is when we're in a group-like setting and something is delivered in one way, as a kind of one-size-fits-all approach, and it doesn't matter if you're neurodivergent or not. That doesn't work, because of neurodiversity, right? It's just everybody's going to internalize that differently or receive that differently. So this kind of painting with a broad brush, so to speak, can be problematic and has, for me, created challenges and whatever, if it's a misinterpretation, or what usually has been the case is just that it's another aspect of me feeling like I'm doing something wrong or not working hard enough. When I was in burnout, in fact, I remember feeling and saying, but I have all these tools. I'm a spiritual person. I teach yoga. I meditate. I do all the things. This isn't like, that's supposed to be my protection from the human experience, right? Because that's what we're told. We're told that if you just meditate hard enough or long enough, you're not going to have to deal with the unpleasant emotions. That's not what my teacher taught me. Teachers, but that is a message that's going around in a lot of brains. That's what we're internalizing. So it's very fraught, I think. But I also think there is so much goodness and there is so much benefit to so many of the teachings. I don't know that I would be who I am today without them, and I don't know that I would have moved through a lot of what I did move through as an undiagnosed person without them. So I'm super grateful, but I'm also much, much more aware of how nuanced it is.
How do you navigate skepticism, both external and internal, around these practices?
I think that everybody has their own experience, and I think that these are experiential practices. We can't possibly know what somebody else is experiencing, even if we've had the same. Like I always say, my brother and I grew up in the same exact house, and we had the same, what I would think were same exact experiences. And then if I chat with him about something, I'm like, that's how you saw that. You know, I see that so very differently, and that's so fascinating to me. So it doesn't matter what, you know, somebody else's experience of it is. It's completely experiential, and we need to leave room for that. We need to not be telling people what they should get out of something, or what they will get out of something, but instead just allow them space to see what they do get out of it. And it might not be beneficial to them, and that's okay too. So I think that there are enough avenues and enough ways for people to express themselves and feel connected with themselves. I certainly don't think there's any one way. So, you know, especially with the tarot, you know, I see a lot of people you know, the movies and fictional books don't help us either, right? So they really paint a picture um, of tarot that is certainly not my approach. It's really a process of becoming familiar with yourself, as is yoga and how I teach yoga. So, and that's a phrase that my teacher, Cindy Lee, often uses. It's this process of familiarization. And I love that. And that means that it can change from moment to moment. So that really offers up a lot of permission to let ourselves be as we are, even if it's ever changing, and to let others do the same.
What question do you wish people asked you more often?
I'm not sure, because I have such an aversion to being asked questions, which is interesting. It's, you know, it depends upon capacity too, of course. Like, I'm enjoying your questions, but it depends upon capacity, and I think it depends upon where it's coming from too. If people truly want to understand, and they are truly interested, and they want to hear my experience and what I have to say about it, then I'm happy to share. But if it's coming from a place of trying to, like, prove me wrong, or minimize whatever it is, I'm just not really interested in having those conversations anymore. But as far as what do I wish people asked me, I mean, maybe, do you need anything? That might be nice, and really mean it, you know, or what can I do to support you? Things like that. Because, like, how are you? I'm just going to say fine, even when I'm not fine. And I know a lot of people do that. And I also don't want to have to divulge all of my deepest, darkest stuff. So things like, how can I help you, or how can I support you, or what can I bring you, or do you need anything, feel a little bit more accessible for me.
Is there something about late diagnosed ADHD that feels consistently misunderstood?
Yeah, I do. I feel like we are consistently, not understood. And unfortunately, that's because I don't think that we've been given enough room to express ourselves in a way that is believed and that is validated, and so then that other people might be able to relate to. So I think it's really challenging. I mean, it's challenging for me sometimes when I'm like, I don't know why this is happening. Or sometimes I'll be able to say, like, wow, my ADHD is very loud right now. But it can be difficult to suss out. And when I first received my diagnosis, I told just the closest people to me initially. And I had a couple of different responses. The best one that I possibly could have asked for was, I told my husband. Well, first of all, I told him that I thought that I was autistic. And then I wanted to go and get an official diagnosis. And when I did, and I received validation of what I thought to be true, and I said to my husband, so I'm autistic and ADHD. And he said, that makes sense. I could see that. And it was the best thing he could have said to me. It was so like, oh, that's just perfect. Um, and then there were other people who said, well, what about you is autistic? Or there's nothing wrong with you. And I think that there's nothing wrong with you is a well-meaning thing, because I know there's nothing wrong with me, and there's nothing wrong with any neurodivergent folks. Um, but this need for people to try to make it more palatable or to make it okay, um, and also based on lesser representations of higher support needed, individuals, people with higher support needs, and people who need, different levels of accommodation and who present differently. I think it's all based on that, which is a shame, because it's a shame for them because it's completely invalidating to them and their life experience. And it's a shame for folks who present in a completely different way, because then we're not believed when things are really difficult. Um, so it can be very interesting, how people respond, and I don't want to have to prove my autism or ADHD to anybody, so as I said, I had one friend who said to me, what about you makes you autistic? And that's just, it's so deflating. um so I don't know necessarily how to help people understand. And I don't think that the onus should only be on us. If there are people in your life who are telling you that they are neurodivergent, diagnoses or not, does not matter, then, do some research. And it's the onus shouldn't be on us to constantly be trying to educate everybody about what it is that makes a woman um ADHD, or what it is that, makes somebody however they are presenting or experiencing their own neurodivergence. Um, and it's not necessarily, there's not that it's about fault, but obviously there are still all of these archaic narratives around neurodivergence. Most folks still believe that neurodivergence just means autism and ADHD, which leaves so many people out of the equation and completely invalidated. Or so much of what we're experiencing internally is completely minimized or told that we're wrong, it's inconsistent. So it's extremely challenging, and the research obviously is not there. And also because so much is dependent upon the DSM, which is just the worst. Um, there's a lot of invalidation that happens with that as well. So I think listening to neurodivergent people as individuals, when and if we want to share, and knowing that you don't need to have the same experience as me or anybody else for it to be real, and to offer up some support and validation. I don't know how else anybody moves forward.
If we only had time to go deep on one story or a theme, what should it be?
I mean, so much focuses on unmasking, right? But I feel like it's like this freedom of expression, this freedom to show up fully as who and how we are. I think that's like a huge part of it for me. And the irrationality of people expecting anything else is bizarre and and frustrating. And so I think this, like, and as I said, that's kind of what I want people to, and regardless of neurotype, from anything that I'm offering, I want people to feel like there is a space where I can land fully as myself. And insofar as I want to, with whatever it is I want to divulge, or am capable of divulging, and knowing that, all parts of myself I can integrate and be who I am. and not be punished for it and not be neglected or abandoned or ostracized or whatever the case may be. I think that's just, and if we all have one person that we're able to do that with, then we're fortunate. But as a society, who, we're all dependent upon each other for our very survival. Certainly, when we're receiving the messages from the people and systems that hold power, I feel like the more that a community can rise up and offer that sense of safety and acceptance, it's just crucial.
What feels most alive or tender for you right now in your work?
I'm writing a book, and it's so much harder than I imagined it was going to be. It's I am in contract with an awesome publishing company, and I am writing a book called the Autistic Arcana. So it's a neurodivergent approach to tarot magic. And it's really reframing the archetypes and all of the 22 cards of the Major Arcana. I won't go too in depth because I know it's not necessarily everybody's bag, but it is so much more challenging than I expected it to be. When I'm writing poetry, I expect the emotion. I expect that more expressive quality. I guess I'm even looking for it. This is a, traditional nonfiction book that has to be relatable to readers of all neurotypes, but certainly most specifically for neurodivergent folks. And I find it to be such a huge responsibility. And also, I can only speak from my own experience. And I'm finding that as I'm going through the process of writing it, so many things are right here at the surface again. And I'm feeling it is all that I guess I can say. I'm surprised by it. For a lot of people, they would think like, well, what's the big deal? It's a tarot book, but that's what I mean when I said earlier what these symbols can bring up. Yeah. And then the associations that we can make from them can bring us so much deeper than we expect. So even as I'm writing it, that's what's happening with me. And it's much, much more emotional and tender than I expected it to be. And I'm finding it super challenging, and I have a deadline. So I have to keep coming back to it. But it's been a very interesting experience because I have not felt that with more traditional formats. So if I'm writing an essay or anything like that, I can be more expressive. Maybe it goes off a little bit, but this is like, I've just never experienced this before to the extent that I am. And it's surprising. It also makes sense. So I'm trying to, I think maybe it'll be a good thing for me, maybe it's going to be even more healing like the Life Forest has been. But it's not easy because it's reminded me of things that I've had to do for my child for the past 10 years and conversations that I've had and just the difficulties that you come up against just in everyday life. And really the book is 1,000 times validation of that, and also a reframing to turn to look at the strengths within each individual and allow the cards to be the reminders of that. So I think it's powerful.
As we wrap up today's conversation with Erica, I keep coming back to one idea. Liberation begins with unmasking, and true healing happens when we are allowed to stand fully in who and how we are. What stood out to me wasn't just the information. It was the reminder that liberation is personal and collective, and unmasking is a political act, not just a personal one. Under everything Erica says is one through line. The practices that help you survive can also become the practices that help you belong, and then help others belong too. Because this work, whether we're talking about neurodiversity, disability, ethics, education, family systems, or workplace culture, isn't abstract. It's lived. It shows up in how we design systems, how we speak to one another, what we assume is normal, and what we're willing to question. If there's one takeaway I hope you carry with you, it's this: grace and self-understanding change everything. For those of you who identify personally with today's topic, whether as neurodivergent, disabled, caregivers, educators, clinicians, or advocates, I hope this episode felt affirming. Your experience is real. Your voice matters. And cultural growth takes time. For those listening from a position of professional responsibility or relative privilege, maybe the invitation is slightly different. Pause. Reflect. Notice your lens. Growth doesn't require perfection. It requires awareness. And awareness practiced daily becomes change. We don't move culture forward through outrage alone. We move it forward through conversation, through humility, through staying in the room. So wherever you're listening from today, thank you. Thank you for choosing nuance. Thank you for choosing reflection. Thank you for choosing to keep building. This is the Neurodiversity Voices podcast, and we'll continue the conversation next time.